Thank you very much, member. Recognizing the member from Boundary Similkameen.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise here today as the MLA for Boundary Similkameen. It is truly a privilege to represent the people of my region here in this House. It has been shocking to me that this side of the House and that side of the House seem to be reading a completely different document throughout this whole thing. I'm kind of astonished by it. But the people of my region work hard. We care deeply about our communities, and we simply want a government that is responsible with both their trust and their tax dollars. This is my second year delivering a response speech in this House, and I'll be candid, it is disheartening to stand here again reviewing a budget that does not reflect the needs and realities of the people of the Boundary Similkameen. Over and over again, I hear the same thing. People have lost faith in their government and its ability to navigate the challenges ahead. They're tired of political spin. They're tired of talking points. They're tired of feeling like no one is listening, and I agree. So my remarks today are not about theatrics. They're about accountability. My job as opposition is to examine the numbers, examine the outcomes, and hold this government to account. On budget day, I sat in this chamber and listened to the Minister of Finance take victory lap after victory lap about the hard work she had done. Somehow, in 45 minutes, she failed to acknowledge the elephant in the room, that this budget added more than $13 billion in new operating deficit to our books for British Columbia. If that is not spin, I don't know what is. Since this budget was introduced, my office has been flooded with emails and phone calls. These are not angry calls. These are worried calls. They're fearful calls. They're people that are concerned about their future. People are afraid because they see climbing debt and they don't see a clear plan to turn the corner, and this document does not have it. They hear the messaging, but when they see the numbers, the two don't match. For weeks, British Columbians were told that tough decisions were coming, that hard choices would be made, that fiscal discipline would be restored. And then this budget arrives with a projected deficit of over $13.3 billion for this fiscal year coming up. But that deficit number alone doesn't tell the full story. People keep asking me why the numbers don't add up. How does a $13.3 billion deficit translate into roughly billion in debt in a single year? The answer is this for my constituents. The province reports capital spending separately from operating spending. So yes, we have roughly $13.3 billion in operating deficit, but we also have another $13 billion in capital borrowing that we're adding to our debt. Meaning that this year alone, we're adding more than $26 billion to our debt. And over the 3-year forecast period, this government's taxpayer-supported debt climbs to over $189 billion, an increase of approximately $72.5 billion in just 3 years. That is the credit card we are building. And what makes it more concerning is it is accumulating with no plan forward. Even by 28-29, the deficit remains projected at approximately $11.5 billion for British Columbians, still billions more than where we stand today, which was a record deficit. And it's not this House that will ultimately carry it. It is the generations to come. This is the legacy we are leaving, a massive credit card bill. In our household and our businesses, we know that debt has a cost. In the government's own financial forecast, interest is projected at almost $6.4 billion this year, an increase of roughly $1.3 billion in 1 year alone. That now represents 6.2 cents of every dollar collected by the province, and by 28-29, 8.2 cents of every dollar will go to our debt. At the same time, our debt to GDP ratio approaches 40%. That is not insignificant. That level of debt exposure increases the risk of credit downgrades, and when that happens, borrowing costs will increase further. We understand this at home. We understand that in our business. When your debt outpaces your income, lenders view you as a higher risk. The higher the risk, the higher the interest rate. The higher the interest rate, the harder it becomes to get ahead. it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. And these forecasts do not include the possible downgrades on our credit rating. And that $6.4 billion in interest payments, that money doesn't build a hospital. It doesn't open an emergency room. It doesn't create new long-term care beds. It does not fix a riverbank in the Similkameen. It does not upgrade Highway 3. And it does not strengthen the wildfire resiliency of our communities. It simply services debt. And to the people of Boundary Similkameen, I'm sorry, but this budget does in fact have none of these things for us. No identified investments in schools, nothing for our hospitals, no new long-term care beds, no water mitigation measures, and no highway upgrades coming for Highway 3. Let me put that into a perspective in another way. If we combine the operating budgets of the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, Mining, Water and Lands, Housing and Municipal Affairs, Emergency Management, Environment and Parks, Jobs, Tourism, Labor, Energy, and the Attorney General, Citizen Services, Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, Infrastructure and Transportation, 16 ministries responsible for economic development, housing, and infrastructure resource management, rural support, environmental protections, and disaster resilience across our province, their total combined operating budget is just over $6.2 billion, not even our interest payment for those 16 ministries. Imagine what even a portion of that $6 billion could do for my region. We could repair the Kettle Valley Rail Trail in Princeton, who's recently been announced that we are losing the section between Princeton and Brookmere, and the province has approved $20 million to deactivate the trail and lose that economic driver for the community of Princeton and Tulameen. At the same time where we're supposed to be pivoting into new tourism opportunities away from being dependent on the resource sector. But at the same time, we are not going to invest in that recreational infrastructure. In Princeton and Tulameen, we could fix our water mitigation. All the residents sat there in December in our flood event and watched the rivers rise. We have no dikes. All we've got is $100,000 to study the problem. We need to get them fixed. Tulameen's dike is considered orphaned. Nobody's responsible, nobody can do any work, and the whole community is at risk, and that lies with this province. Asuyas needs $73 million for a water treatment facility so that they don't have to drink brown bathwater in their sinks. Oliver needs repairs to their agricultural ditch. It's a primary water service for the community of Oliver. Kaleden needs a water treatment center to bring their water up to the new standards. Keremeos needs a new well. Headley needs a new well. The new health standard has lowered the thresholds for arsenic, and their well is now exceeding the thresholds, and they have water that is impotable to drink. In Grand Forks, we have many projects that could be funded with just that money. This is the lost opportunity that our cost of borrowing is creating without a plan to get out. Debt is now one of the largest line items in the provincial budget. If debt servicing was a ministry, it would be the third largest ministry in British Columbia. Let that sink in. The third largest ministry. Only health and education would be above them. To me, that is not fiscal strength. This is a warning signal. And to further illustrate the imbalance in this budget, I will quote directly from the Budget 26, page 29, where it says, over the past 10 years, public sector job growth has increased by over 40%, including more than 80,000 FTEs since 2020. That's 80,000 new people in the public service. This has significantly outpaced economic growth and general population growth, end quote. It took them 5 years to understand that? It's mind-boggling to me that the plan calls for reducing the workforce by 15,000 workers over the next 3 years, while simultaneously claiming that frontline workers and service delivery will be protected. So where were the 15,000 workers? If they're not in the frontline and service delivery and we're able to eliminate those positions without affecting frontline services, what are we paying for? We have to conclude that those 15,000 positions were either not needed or not delivering frontline services. And I also am a little skeptical about the reductions occurring at all, when only 7% are projected in the current upcoming fiscal year, 28% the next year, and we're going to do 65% of that workforce reduction in 28-29, an election year. I highly doubt that the cuts are going to happen in 28-29. This is a government that has not consistently kept its promises. British Columbians will remember the $1,000 grocery rebate that was promised during the election and then not delivered. Last week, I could hear accountants across the province collectively yelling at their TV screens, not only because 7% PST has now been added to their services, but when they heard the minister stand in this house and claim this is a balanced budget, I could hear them yelling. That is not the math I was taught in school, and no business or municipality or school board would consider a $13.3 billion debt a balanced budget. And in fact, many of those cannot even deliver a deficit budget. I can tell you the people of Boundary Similkameen disagree that that is a balanced budget. Over the last 15 months, I've met with business owners, farmers, foresters, healthcare workers, municipal leaders and families across my riding. There's not one sector that feels stable and supported. The common themes are clear. Bureaucracy that slows investment, goalposts that move, permits delayed, banks are tightening lending because confidence is down, people unsure if they truly even own the land they live on, and industries planning for survival instead of expansion. Those are not indicators of an economy on the verge of thriving. This budget reflects an attempt to manage decline, not reverse it. The government speaks of protecting health and education. I agree, these are core values of British Columbians. But status quo funding only works if the system is stable today. In Boundary Similkameen, it is not stable today. In Grand Forks, the community took on the capital and operation of its doctor's clinic just to keep it open. Now the local tax dollars meant for roads, recreation, and municipal services were redirected to cover that provincial shortfall. In Keremeos, our emergency room is open from 9 to 5 on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That is 24 hours a week, not a day, 24 hours a week. And it has been 1,575 days since I've had overnight emergency coverage in Keremeos. That is ludicrous. And even with those limited hours, we only have one ambulance on shift frequently. This past weekend, Princeton's emergency room was also closed, and patients were redirected to Oliver. Princeton participates in a virtual physician emergency coverage pilot program, yet even with that virtual coverage in place, it could not maintain service. With Keremeos also closed, residents were sent to Oliver, another emergency room struggling to stay open. For residents of Princeton, and for those in the room, Oliver is an hour and a half away from Princeton on winter roads that frequently have black ice along the river between Princeton and Headley. These communities are exploring we have other communities in my riding, like Oliver, that are exploring temporary housing options to recruit doctors. Again, another cost borne by the municipality. This is not a failure of doctors, nurses, paramedics, or frontline workers. They are doing everything they can to work within a broken system. They are stretched beyond thin. But while this budget protects the status quo, it does not provide that meaningful shift in trajectory that rural healthcare requires. I'm going to switch to talk a little bit about long-term care. We know British Columbians need 16,000 additional beds by 2036. Yet families in my riding are waiting. They're waiting in hallways in hospitals. They're waiting in homes for months. In my own circle of friends, I have a friend who has a spouse who's in Princeton. I have another friend whose mother's in Oliver, and another friend whose father's in Kelowna. Those are hours of driving, spouses left alone, families rearranging their lives to make sure those loved ones feel loved and supported, and creating a lot of emotional and financial strain because there's nowhere in my community for them to go to. At the same time, seniors aging in place now face property tax deferment interest at prime plus 2%. Compounded monthly, that is a 4% increase in this budget. 4%. Higher borrowing costs mean less money available for their care because they are deferring that until they sell their houses to pay for their long-term care. That money is going to come out of that budget they have available when they need to get that care. This is more pressure on a system that has nowhere for them to go besides stay at home. I do want to turn to the Premier's message. The Premier has repeatedly stated that the solution is to get the economy going. I agree. We need to get it going, but the numbers must match the rhetoric. This is not a budget that shows the economy is going. It doesn't show a forecast of significant growth in the next 3 years. The government's own forecast shows real GDP growth of 1.3% in 2026, rising to 1.8%, and then 1.9% in subsequent years. And even those figures are accompanied by cautionary notes that global things could impact those. That is very modest growth at the best, and it is not an economy that we are investing in to get going. And in forestry, the words and the numbers do not align. Short-term stumpage deferrals are not reform. They are not the fiber certainty that the sector is looking for. They are not 10-year modernization. They are not long-term stability. They move debt from one column to another, 11 months down the road. It does not change the profitability of their company today. When Interfor and Grand Forks curtailed their operations last fall, it had impacts for everywhere in the community. It was the grocery store, the mechanic, the hockey association, the local hairdresser. The municipal was even planning how their taxes were going to be impacted by this change. Thankfully, the mill was able to open on one shift, and they're working to try to keep that shift going. But they were looking to this budget for a clear plan that was going to restore prosperity to them. Instead, they see $5 million to transition workers out of the forestry sector. We see declining stumpage fees in revenue, significant declines, may I add. This budget does not provide them the future that they were looking for. A small amount of transition funding does not replace an industry. We have the ability to get out of the way and allow these businesses to be successful in rural BC. That $5 million will not sustain one mill town that loses their mill, let alone address the thousands of forestry jobs that have been lost and the 3 mills that have closed just recently in the last 3 months. This government speaks frequently about climate change and extreme weather events, yet the emergency management and climate change budget remains stagnant. It is clear that we're not planning for that future where we know these events are going to happen. In Tulameen, again, I will bring up that we have an orphan dike where we cannot protect the community and nobody is authorized to do work on it. The Fire Smart programming appears to be gone. I'm looking forward to estimates to have a good conversation about that. But what this means is simple. People in Tulameen, Princeton, and Keremeos will continue watching the river every time rain is forecast. We have freshet coming. The event in December did significant damage to the dikes in Tulameen. We have not been able to repair them or have any funding or permissions to repair them. That freshet creates a real urgency for the community of Tulameen. But for whatever reason, we're going to continue to study it, we're going to do engineering, and we're going to discuss it. But we're not going to implement those changes. We also used to maintain those riverbeds. We used to dig them out, dredge them out, so that we could make dikes not quite as high. We didn't have to have as much flood mitigation measures. We no longer do that. We need to figure out how to protect our communities and what is more important. I know my communities don't have the ability to tax themselves out of these multi-million-dollar mitigation needs. The community of Princeton will not be able to afford the $63 million they need to fix their water problems in Princeton. They need a partner, they need implementation, and they need certainty. And every time I bring it forward to this government, all I hear is that the federal government hasn't come to the table. I appreciate that, but I think this budget could have indicated that we want them to come to the table and worked on that. Honourable Speaker, British Columbia should be the richest province in Canada. We have the resources, we have the people, we have the geography, we have the world-class tourism, but prosperity does not happen by accident. It requires planning, it requires discipline, it requires coordination across ministries. My riding is not asking for anything special. My riding is asking for alignment. They're asking for prevention instead of reaction. Don't wait until the river is bursting the banks to run out there and do the work. We're asking for implementation instead of endlessly studying the problems and doing forestry reviews, water mitigation studies. Do something. We need work. We need fiscal discipline instead of mounting debt. I have invested the majority of my time since coming into this role educating myself. Boots on the ground. Kitchen tables, small businesses, stakeholder meetings, touring mills, mines, woodlots, Wildlife Federation meetings, everything I can find to educate myself on what we need to make BC better. I need to understand the barriers. I need to understand the risks. And I need to understand the opportunities. And I believe this government isn't doing that boots on the ground work. This budget is disconnected from what's happening on the ground in British Columbia. The last speaker spoke about how life was more affordable. Well, it's not more affordable in the boundaries to Similkameen, and I can assure you that the people of boundaries to Similkameen don't feel supported. I've done this work because when we form government, I want to be ready, and we will form government. We are going to be ready with a plan, we're going to be ready with relationships and partnerships, and we're going to be ready with a path to prosperity that restores confidence, stabilizes our sectors, and ensures British Columbia can deliver the services its people deserves. This is the difference between rhetoric and readiness. And that is why this budget falls short. For me, I will not support a budget that creates generational debt with no plan to turn the tide. This is not the legacy that I want to leave for future British Columbians. This credit card debt that we are accumulating is going to be impossible almost to undo. And the trajectory we're on is only going to get worse. So this is not the legacy I want to leave for future generations. And I hope that this government rethinks their budget 2026 and refocuses their priorities. Thank you.